Hi, everybody. It's good to be here with you. Mel and I are excited to finally have this conversation after it being in the works for a while. Um, we decided to call this On Being Human and Being Kind because we were chatting in a creator retreat cohort that we're both part of about just some of the things that are going on in the world today and how people just don't tend to have civilized discourse anymore. So, Mel, I thought maybe we could start by each of us could give kind of a background, just a brief overview of who we are and why this conversation is important to us. And then I would like to talk about the human library after that.
That sounds terrific.
All right, go ahead.
All right, great. So who am I? My Substack is called Mel's Messy Love Lab, and I am messy. I am attempting to figure out life and the world. I'm 61 years old. I have a 23-year-old kid. My background is in theater and art and writing and music and creating mosaics. I'm all about artistic endeavors and trying things that are new. Yeah, and I'm also a recovering alcoholic. I have been sober 5 years with one relapse. So yeah, I'm proud of that, but that's also just part of my journey. And I really love being in spaces where people can be vulnerable and talk about their truths without having to mask. I work with people with intellectual and developmental diversity in areas around their relationships and sexuality. So that's another piece of what I do. So I'm just kind of a conglomeration of stuff, and I try and get my stuff out there and try and support people as I can in ways that maybe they might find surprising. So.
Yeah, love that. I love being in vulnerable places too, or like showing up in places where I know other people are going to show up as their authentic self. So I
Mhm.
think, I don't know exactly when you and I first started talking about this subject, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jeannie Ewing, and I've been a writer and a speaker for about 10 years. I used to cover the topic of grief. I transitioned about, I don't know, 3 to 5 years ago into more broadly talking about ambivalence in midlife. I'm 44 years old, and I have 5 kids. 3 of them are neurodivergent. One of them has a rare, complex genetic condition called Apert syndrome. And I just think that in the last couple of years, I've really been intentional about making my digital spaces safe and inclusive and welcoming because I felt very threatened in other digital spaces on social media, which is why I got off of them. So I wanted to make sure that whoever showed up to my Substack space would know that I was monitoring comments and making sure there weren't any trolls or hateful remarks and that I delete and block those. And that also just to model what is it like to have civil discourse when people maybe come to a conversation and they're emotionally activated, or maybe they're even hostile sometimes, because I have been able to sort of disarm and de escalate a couple of people online who have been pretty over the top in that regard. So I try to make sure that that's something I model and that also I want people to see how it can work. So anyway, Mel, that's why I'm here in this conversation with you today. And
Hearing that, and I
oh,
can totally do that with you, Jeannie, like that, showing up in that way and de-escalating. Absolutely.
yeah. So okay, I remember one thing that I really wanted you to share, and that's this idea of calling in versus calling out. So maybe we can begin with that and then talk about how the human library has helped you and me in different ways to have these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, sure. So I feel like a lot of times in our culture lately, it's just been calling out, you want to make someone else just feel bad. You're wrong. I'm right. This is good. This is bad. You are an idiot. You are a snowflake, whatever. Just calling people names to get them to make things divisive. And if somebody makes a mistake in some realm, like let's say one, you can end up with some issues. Like, I don't know why the weird. Oh, yeah. So if you misgender someone, for example, which is super important to use the right gender pronouns for people, I think people, for the most part, are truly trying, and sometimes for some people, it's hard. So if someone is misgendered, rather than shaming them and um, telling them that they need to go away, just call them in. Hey, my pronoun is actually they. I'd appreciate it if you did that, rather than shaming and that kind of thing. So that's how I look at it. Sometimes we use language that we shouldn't use or that makes someone uncomfortable. Rather than just immediately blowing up about it, how about let's have a conversation and understand that this other person across from you is another human being who is probably really trying too and has behind them whatever they have. We don't know what other people's stories are. We don't know what they're carrying. And so just being in that space of generosity, curiosity, trying to understand, and then showing up in that way. Not that people who are marginalized have to be the educators of people who are not. It is also our own job to, you know, educate ourselves around all of these issues. But calling people out all the time is just going to continue this divisive situation that we're in.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you mentioned generosity and curiosity because I think that, especially what I'm hearing you say, it's a lot about giving people the benefit of the doubt. And it seems to me when I go in the world, whether I'm out in my own community or I'm online, that people seldom do that. It seems like a lot of people are suspicious and they're kind of always on edge, kind of waiting for a chance to just like get the claws out and just attack.
Yeah.
And so I feel like in giving people the benefit of the doubt and remembering that everyone is carrying a burden, some sort of invisible burden, all of us are. Like we just know that. And then to compound that level of cumbersome onus by adding to it is not helpful. So I feel like a lot of this has to do with how can we undo the layers of collective trauma one by one. Because obviously, Mel, you and I know we can't change systems, but we can change the way that we show up in our daily lives.
Yeah.
And so I also appreciate how you're saying that it's our job to educate ourselves. Like we can't just rely on other people, especially in disenfranchised communities, to educate us. That's not their job. But at the same time, as we are all learning together in relationship, that give each other that grace, that we can extend the fact that, okay, we're going to stumble, we're human, and that in those conversations, to be able to laugh together, to gently correct, to redirect or reframe, there are ways to do this that are very subtle and they're not like really nasty or spiteful or hostile. And I think that that's really a skill that can be learned, but it also has to be practiced over and over and over again.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your experience with the human library and then how that has maybe contributed to this particular worldview that you have that you're sharing.
Yeah, totally. So, I don't know if everybody's familiar with the Human Library, but just a quick summary. So, Human Library, which started in Copenhagen, I don't know, a decade ago or more. Um, Basically, the idea is to unjudge someone. That's their tagline. So, you bring people in and they talk about, so a person who's in a marginalized situation or kind of outside of the norm somehow will be a book for the Human Library, and then they can introduce their book, and then people can just ask them questions. And it's a space where you can be the person that receives those questions and can help people out with that. So for example, my book is polyamory. So I um uh was raised, as many of us are, in a culture where monogamy was the deal, polyamory was strange, and I was never good at it. And so I have learned that the healthy relationship structure that I can be in is polyamorous, and that's being honest with multiple partners, basically. And so that is strange for some people to hear. And so they'll ask a bunch of questions, and I'll give my answers around my personal experience about it. And what I find is when we're in situations like that and we just have a one on one conversation, we're open with truths about our lives. Those conversations always end up for me to be very open, and people are curious. They want to ask hard questions about that. How do you deal with jealousy? What is it like having multiple partners? All of this stuff that you maybe wouldn't want to ask the person on the street. So I think the Human Library does a really good job of getting people in a room to have a conversation, be open to answers, And also there, if somebody asks me a question that I'm uncomfortable answering, I can easily say something like, well, that chapter of this book is not yet written, or something like that to kind of, move along and not shame them or make me feel bad or strange. So,
That I love that. I've not done that yet, but I'm also a book in the human library. Mine is called Reluctant Mom because I was raised to believe that when I became a mom, it was going to be basically my crowning glory. And I never really saw myself having any kids, and I have 5. So that's kind of my hook, I guess. But I really appreciate about the human library the fact that we also get training as books and that we understand how to have these respectful dialogues with other people. How do we redirect, like what you're talking about, Mel? How do we feel safe? How do we make sure that the other person feels safe? But really, the librarians who are trained to be part of these events, these live events or virtual ones, are the ones who kind of go around the room and just check in to make sure that everything's okay and that we do feel safe. So I appreciate that a lot because I think that that is also something that's lacking in a lot of encounters or conversations that happen just in general, right? That we don't necessarily have that built-in safety or that sense of safety. And so I really believe that in order to have a mutually respectful exchange with someone, whether a stranger, acquaintance, a friend, whatever, we have to have and establish trust. And in order to build that trust, there are ways that we can diffuse harsh or kind of blunt or brutal language or words
yeah.
in the way that we choose to respond. I also feel like when we have conversations, whether it's like what you were talking about, Mel, when you're trying to just share from your lived experience, which is a really important thing, I think, is
Mhm.
focusing on our lived experience, right? Instead of making generalizations about a population or something.
I
Um,
was here for all people that are polyamorous. Not true.
That's
Everybody.
right. That's
Yeah.
right, and I see that kind of also being kind of a common tactic that people use when they have these kinds of exchanges that are not helpful and they tend to devolve. It's like these all or nothing kind of binary or dualistic ways of looking at people or groups of people and classifying people, and that's dangerous to me. So I feel like when we're talking about being civilized and being kind, it's really important to remember to speak from my lived experience. So if someone's asking me about motherhood, and I just simply tell them, well, I can't speak for all mothers, but I can tell you what it's been like for me.
Yeah.
They say, well, what's a piece of advice that you would give to someone like me who isn't a mom and I really don't know if I want to become a mom? And I would say, well, I think it's good that you're exploring that question. I really think that it's good that you're asking the questions because I never did. I just kind of followed this, narrative that was in place for my life, and it's not that I regret my children, but it's a lot harder because I didn't have the preparation. So that's kind of a snippet or an example of a way that I might share with somebody without making a universal declaration about, this is the experience of every mother, or this is what your experience will be. It's more like a gentle, "Okay, well, this is what I can offer you,
Sure.
but I also wanna coach you and encourage you to explore your own lived experience, and through this conversation, I hope that we both can come away feeling more enriched."
That's great. Well, a tactic that use that's very similar to what you were just saying is I'll say if someone asks me a specific kind of question that I might be related to, I'll just say for example, as a single mother of a 23-year-old person, this is what I believe about this thing. Or as someone who was raised Southern Baptist and is no longer religious, this is what I feel about this subject. If that's, just so that I'm already letting them know, here's the category that I'm fitting in, that I know about me based on the question that you're asking, and then just giving them that example for me. And then the follow-up question would be, so from your perspective, what does this look like?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And also, like, I was thinking about how when we're talking about people who just blatantly will call, like, a group of people or a specific person a name, like, I'm thinking of the word monster that I've seen in my feed in Substack quite a
oh,
bit lately.
oh
Um,
no.
you know, this is how I might gently respond, and I have in the comments. I'll just say, "I'm wondering if it's helpful to call people names. Whenever I see something like the word monster, it bothers me because I realize that every human is complex and nuanced, and I don't think we're being fair to the other side of that person's humanity. Like, I might just comment like that, or I might say something like, well, and if they push back in a way, which has happened, I might then respond and say, well, you're free to use the language that you would like to use. I'm choosing not to use the word monster or to call people names because I found that it's actually more helpful to treat other people with respect and to not assume or go into a conversation with another person with a negative connotation about them. So there's certain ways I think, Mel, that you and I are trying to share with other people about how this might work in real life when we're kind of caught off guard and we're not really sure what to do or how to respond.
Yeah. One of the things that I was thinking of when you were talking about the, librarians at the human library, that as you were, talking about it, it reminded me that really part of that is having allies. Like, you can think of librarians as allies in the human library, and so if we are in a situation where we're watching something happen, how do we show up as allies around a situation? So, if I went back to what I was talking about earlier, someone misgenders someone, rather than having to have that and in a group, let's say, rather than having to have the person who is being misgendered have to be the one to say, "Hey, my pronoun is they," someone who is there could literally say, "Oh, Pat goes by they." Just make it easy and not, like, shame me at all, just, like, just information, and be calm about it, you know? And then that makes it easy on the person that's getting misgendered. It doesn't really shame the person who made a mistake, you know? I'm sure they weren't kinda just trying to be a problem. So, I think mostly people are not trying to be problems, they're just trying to live their lives, you know?
Yeah. So that's a really great point, and I love how, like, when I hear ally, I also think of the word advocacy or advocate. Because, when we think of what you're talking about, really, in my opinion, Mel, is like what it means to build a sense of belonging and community and make sure everyone is invited and included in the conversations. And we have to, I think that, like, there's some basic assumptions that we need to bring when we have conversations. We have to assume that people have good intentions, like what you're saying, give them the benefit of the doubt, extend grace, gently reframe or redirect. I also want to add that this is something I think is really important when we're talking about someone who might be emotionally activated or become that way. Maybe they become triggered because there's a certain phrase or word or way that somebody puts something that just sets them off. So, the way that I like to think about that for myself or how I handle it is I like to acknowledge my own internal reaction in the moment, like to just kind of quietly tell myself, okay, I'm feeling alarmed right now, or I'm feeling kind of triggered. So I'm going to commit to myself to go revisit that later, like in therapy, or I'm going to do some process journaling or something where I'm not going to be projecting that feeling into this conversation and onto this person. And then, for me, and when I'm able to do that, I can set that commitment aside and then re-enter that discussion or conversation with the other person, being level-headed and emotionally regulated and really being able to be present and listen. And oftentimes when that other person has maybe a rising tone of voice and they're getting increasingly angry, because I am remaining calm and because I'm using intentional language and being conscious and sensitive about how I'm talking to them and using empathy too. So I hear what you're saying. I can see why you might feel that way. Or I that makes sense that you would come to that conclusion. Things like that. Then often what I notice is it really does disarm the other person and they do begin to come down to where we're both level headed and then we can have a mutually respectful conversation or dialogue. So I'm not saying that happens in every situation or that it should. I'm not saying that it should because there are genuinely unsafe situations and we need to know how to handle those too. I just wanted to offer that, like, this might be a way to recognize our own emotional activation and set it aside when we're in a heated debate or something.
Boy, I love that thought. I mean, that's, like, next level. It's really good to, like I mean, I totally get it, like, identifying your feelings, finding them where they are in your body, being able to label them. But I love the fact that you give yourself that whole mental idea of, "Okay, I recognize that this is happening. There is something activated here. I don't have to deal with this right here in this moment with this human. I can put it aside for later. And people do tend to mirror what's going on with the other person around them. So, if you can breathe and slow down, people will probably start to settle as well in those situations. And I think most especially if you are being empathetic with them. I see what you're saying. I understand your perspective here.
Mhm, mhm.
I'm from background and this is mine.
Yeah, I think that, being a mom has actually helped me with that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Kids have big feelings,
Oh,
and
cool.
they're learning how to regulate by co-regulation, which is what you're talking about. So when our nervous systems mirror the other person or in a room, right? When we can feel maybe alarmed or activated because there's a lot of anxiety in the room or with the other person, then it's almost like when I learned that, okay, I am a mom and I am the grown up, so I have to work on my own shit
Yep.
before, I expect my kids to know how to do that for themselves. Then it's really helped me to in that process of self-examination and really working on learning how to self-regulate, which I did not learn how to do as a child. And so in so doing, whenever my kids just have this out of nowhere reaction, it does. It helps me because I've learned by being their mom on
Right.
how to like, okay, sweetie, what's going on? Let's breathe together. What are some things that might help you calm down right now? I see that you have your squishy. Do you want to use that? Or they might be like, I want to color. I'm like, okay, we can color together. And then when I can recognize that they're more regulated or calmed down, then we can talk about it, whatever it is. Like, hey, what was going on there? It sounded like maybe you were a little bit frustrated, or do you feel jealous and left out based on what I knew, right? Or the context. And I'm not saying that works with adults, but I am saying that it is a skill that we develop the more that we practice it. It's the empathy muscle, in my opinion. And, with, going into the world the way that it is, I actually believe that it's more important now than ever before that each one of us on a daily basis comes back to ourselves. And like you were saying, Mel, be aware of our bodily reactions, being aware of where we're feeling that emotion in our body. And, for highly sensitive people, that might mean that we have to take a lot of breaks. And that might mean we have to excuse ourselves. There are times at family gatherings, because we have three neurodivergent children, that I'll kind of have this family debriefing and I'll just be like, hey, if you guys feel or if I feel really overwhelmed, all you have to do is come up to me or dad or another grown up and say, I need to take a break. And we will have like a safe place for you to go, a room that you can go in, or, if we're outside or something, somewhere that where we can supervise, but they can have some quiet time. And that's something that, again, I think that if we as adults learn how to do that throughout our days, to just take those breaks and to tend to the needs that we have, then we will necessarily go into the world more level-headed and regulated, and we can have those kinds of hard conversations that probably will pop up.
Yeah.
What
I totally agree. I think that at least for me, like I've got a baseline anxiety lizard brain going off at all times right now. Like that's just I got to go with that's my baseline. So but I can't let that flip over because I mean I can, but it's not healthy for anybody else around me if I do make that anxiety become huge. So I do have to constantly go, okay, well this is baseline right now. Things are dangerous, some things right now. I got to just own that and know it, but my day to day doesn't have to be dangerous. My moment to moment doesn't have to be dangerous. And so feeling into those things and then also being able to literally label what that feeling is without just making it, I feel fine or I feel good or I feel great. What do I feel? Am I feeling joy? Am I feeling ang- uh, anxious to the degree that I really actually have to remove myself from the situation? Am I feeling angry? Where is that anger coming from? What's it about? Like getting deeper and deeper into labeling what those emotions are so that then you know how to deal with them. And then I know that there is some controversy around The Body Keeps the Score, that book, but I say for me, it makes a whole lot of sense with someone with trauma from childhood there is stuff that is still stored in my body that I have to work out in different ways. And so, I think being able to label that stuff and own it and not go, well, that's this person that is making me feel this way or, you know, do this thing. It's not that. It's what's going on with me. So, yeah.
So, ownership is huge. I think that we're kind of right now we're talking about emotional literacy, really. Because if we're going to grow in a psychological and mentally healthy or emotionally healthy way, then taking responsibility for our own feelings and responses and decisions, behaviors, and also recognizing that our intent might not actually match the impact of what we say or do. That's also important. But this concept of ownership and taking responsibility is really an emotionally mature thing to do. And it's really hard when, like you're talking, Mel, that many of us, our baseline is anxious. And I think that being honest with ourselves and saying, yeah, that's a real thing. There are real threats and my body is responding to that. And I have to just admit it and allow it to be what it is instead of, like you said, trying to shape it into something that we're minimizing or diminishing, or maybe denying altogether, like stuffing under the rug or pretending like everything's fine. But again, this really is a practice that has to be put into place and it has to be done over and over for it to become a habit. But I think that well, actually, I was just going to ask you what are some final thoughts that you want to say? Because I was just looking at the clock, so I don't want to drone on and on. I want to just kind of see what you want to wrap up with.
Well, no, I think this is such a great conversation, and I would love. I'm going to continue this on in my Substack as well. Like I have a thing on call in and call out, but I do think that this stuff is really important. The biggest takeaway for me is curiosity around another human being and where they're at, and being open enough to be vulnerable and truthful with the way that I share my life or my experiences. So I really like personally to be more outward facing, to listen more than I talk in situations where someone's struggling or some snafu happens and someone says something wrong, landing in a space of curiosity as opposed to judgment, I think is it feels better, certainly for me, and it probably feels better for the other person. So, and another thing that you had talked about, briefly touched on, community is so important right now. We cannot be isolating. We cannot just go, okay, that's it, I'm done, and I'm just going to be on my own. We are surrounded by other human beings that have very different points of view, and that's okay.
Huh. It's good.
Yeah,
It's more okay. It's good.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
all bring something different.
Yeah,
It colors the world and it colors our relationships. It brings texture.
yeah.
And what you said, Mel, about listening and being present and curious reminded me of a quote that I actually just read yesterday. And it was by Judith Bird, I think. And it was wage peace by listening.
That's so good.
So, I think that if we really want to create a society that is more centered and grounded in peace, and we want to contribute to collective healing, this is how we do it. We do it in these conversations. We do it by going back to ourselves again and again, every day, throughout the day, and then bringing the best version of ourselves that we can to these conversations or excusing ourselves when we can't.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Oh, this was a great conversation. I'm so glad it finally worked, even though it was a little bit later. But I want to thank every one of you who joined us today. I saw a couple of familiar names pop in. And for those of you who couldn't join us but see the replay, thank you for your time today, too. We'll
Yeah,
see
thanks so much, Jeannie.